Time since former President Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts of filing false business documents here in New York. President Biden is actually expected to speak about to the nation about Israel's war with Hamas, urging Hamas to accept the hostage deal that has been put on the table in recent days. This would be a critical step before any possible peace plan to try to end the conflict in Gaza, which is about to enter its 8th month. I should mention we don't know if the president will address the 34 felony guilty verdicts in the last 24 hours. We know he will address what you're looking at now. Israel's intensified operation inside the southern Gaza city of Rafah. The Israeli military today saying its forces have advanced into central Rafah despite global backlash and calls to scale back the assault there. Just this week, an Israeli official suggesting this war in Gaza could go until at least the end of the year, another 7 months. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said the war will continue, he says, until Hamas is destroyed. Hostage talks between Israel and Hamas broke off about 3 weeks ago. It's believed more than 100 hostages are still being held in Gaza. You're looking at the state dining room there, obviously at the White House. The president expected to speak shortly to the nation about increasing the pressure on Hamas to accept this deal for a ceasefire to try to get these hostages out. As I mentioned, that number, and it bears repeating, at least 100 hostages, it's believed, are still being held inside Gaza. Now, again, what's unclear is whether or not President Biden will address directly the major headline here at home, which is the first criminal conviction of a former president in history. Donald Trump found guilty on those 34 felony counts yesterday afternoon in a New York City courtroom. The former president reacting yesterday and then again today in front of the cameras, calling the trial rigged, saying he will fight on. He said the verdict will come this November when Americans go to the polls. Mary Bruce, you're watching this live camera too as we await the president. Unclear if he'll address the news here at home.
And David, the president, we know, has gone really out of his way to actually stay silent on this trial over the last several weeks. He has been silent since we found out about that guilty verdict yesterday afternoon. But his campaign has really struck a very somber, somewhat muted tone. They are trying not to be too celebratory about this. They don't want to feed into the narrative, which Donald Trump repeated today, the baseless narrative that this was all somehow a political hit job orchestrated by the president. His campaign, though, has said that what we saw yesterday, this verdict, makes clear that no one is above the law. And while clearly the president politically will want to take advantage of this verdict, he is now running against a convicted felon. His campaign, I am told, wants to stay laser focused on outlining the stakes in this election. It remains to be seen, though, just how much the president's going to lean in to this conviction. It's why, if he does choose to address it here, and here comes the president, David.
Just checking this afternoon. Good afternoon. Before I begin my remarks, I just want to say a few words about what happened yesterday in New York City. The American principle that no one is above the law was reaffirmed. Donald Trump was given every opportunity to defend himself. It was a state case, not a federal case, and it was heard by a jury of 12 citizens, 12 Americans, 12 people like you. Like millions of Americans who served on juries, this jury is chosen the same way every jury in America is chosen. It was a process that Donald Trump's attorney was part of. The jury heard 5 weeks of evidence, 5 weeks. And after careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. They found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts. Now he'll be given the opportunity, as he should, to appeal that decision just like everyone else has that opportunity. That's how the American system of justice works. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Our justice system has endured for nearly 250 years. And it literally is the cornerstone of America, our justice system. The justice system should be respected, and we should never allow anyone to tear it down. It's as simple as that. That's America. That's who we are. And that's who we'll always be, God willing. Now to another issue. I I want to give it up to you. Like millions of Americans who served on juries, this jury is chosen the same way every jury in America is chosen. It was a process that Donald Trump's attorney was part of. The jury heard 5 weeks of evidence, 5 weeks. And after careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. They found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts. Now he'll be given the opportunity, as he should, to appeal that decision just like everyone else has that opportunity. That's how the American system of justice works. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Our justice system has endured for nearly 250 years. And it literally is the cornerstone of America, our justice system. The justice system should be respected, and we should never allow anyone to tear it down. It's as simple as that. That's America. That's who we are. And that's who we'll always be, God willing. Now to another issue. I want to give an update on my efforts to end the crisis in Gaza. For the past several months, my negotiators of foreign policy, intelligence community, and like have been relentlessly focused, not just on a ceasefire that would inevitably be fragile and temporary, but on a durable end of the war. That's been the focus, a durable end of this war. One that brings all the hostages home, ensures Israel's security, creates a better day after in Gaza without Hamas in power, and sets the stage for a political settlement that provides a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Now, after intensive diplomacy carried out by my team, my many conversations with leaders of Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, and other Middle Eastern countries, Israel has offered a comprehensive new proposal. It's a roadmap to an enduring ceasefire and the release of all hostages. This proposal has been transmitted by Qatar to Hamas. Today, I want to lay out its terms for the American citizens and for the world. This new proposal has 3 phases. The first phase would last for 6 weeks. Here's what it would include: a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza, release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, in exchange for release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. There are American hostages who would be released at this stage, and we want them home. Additional, some remains of hostages who have been killed would be returned to their families, bringing some degree of closure to that terrible grief. Palestinians, civilians would return to their homes and neighborhoods in all areas of Gaza, including in the north. Humanitarian assistance would surge, with 600 trucks carrying aid into Gaza every single day. With the ceasefire, that aid could be safely and effectively distributed to all who need it. Hundreds of thousands of temporary shelters, including housing units, would be delivered by the international community. All that and more would begin immediately. During the 6 weeks of phase 1, Israel and Hamas would negotiate the necessary arrangements to get to phase 2, which is a permanent end to hostilities. Now, I'll be straight with you. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from phase 1 to phase 2. Israel will want to make sure its interests are protected. But the proposal says if the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks for phase 1, the ceasefire will still continue as long as negotiations continue. In the United States, Egypt, and Qatar would work to ensure negotiations keep going. All agreements, until all the agreements are reached and phase 2 is able to begin. Then phase 2, there'd be an exchange for the release of all remaining living hostages, including male soldiers. Israeli forces would withdraw from Gaza, And as long as Hamas lives up to its commitments, a temporary ceasefire would become, in the words of the Israeli proposal, the cessation of hostilities permanently, end of quote. Cessation of hostilities permanently. Finally, in phase 3, a major reconstruction plan for Gaza would commence, and any final remains of hostages who've been killed would be returned to their families. That's the offer that's now on the table. And what we've been asking for. It's what we need. The people of Israel should know they can make this offer without any further risk to their own security because they've devastated Hamas forces over the past 8 months. At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out another October 7th, which is one of the Israelis' main objectives in this war, and quite frankly, a righteous one. I know there are those in Israel who will not agree with this plan and will call for the war to continue indefinitely. Some are even in the government coalition. And they've made it clear they want to occupy Gaza, they want to keep fighting for years, and the hostages are not a priority to them. Well, I've urged the leadership in Israel to stand behind this deal, despite whatever pressure comes. And to the people of Israel, let me say this. As someone who's had a lifelong commitment to Israel, as the only American president who's ever gone to Israel in a time of war, as someone who just sent the U.S. forces to directly defend Israel when it was attacked by Iran, I ask you to take a step back and think what will happen if this moment is lost. We can't lose this moment. Indefinite war in pursuit of an unidentified notion of total victory will not bring Israel, will only bog down Israel and Gaza, draining the economic, military, and human resources, and furthering Israel's isolation in the world. That will not bring hostages home. That will not bring an enduring defeat of Hamas. That will not bring Israel lasting security. But a comprehensive approach that starts with this deal will bring hostages home and will lead to more secure Israel. And once a ceasefire and hostage deal is concluded, it unlocks the possibility of a great deal more progress, including calm along Israel's northern border with Lebanon. The United States will help forge a diplomatic resolution, one that ensures Israel's security and allows people to safely return to their homes without fear of being attacked. With the deal, a rebuilding of Gaza will begin. Arab nations and the international community, along with Palestinian and Israeli leaders, to get it done in a manner that does not allow Hamas to rearm. And the United States will work with our partners to rebuild homes, schools, and hospitals in Gaza, to help repair communities that were destroyed in the chaos of war. And with this deal, Israel could become more deeply integrated in the region, including, it's no surprise to you all, including potential historic normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia. Israel could be part of a regional security network to counter the threat posed by Iran. All this progress would make Israel more secure, with Israeli families no longer living in the shadow of a terrorist attack. And all this would create the conditions for a different future, a better future for the Palestinian people, one of self-determination, dignity, security, and freedom. This path is available once the deal is struck. Israel will always have the right to defend itself against the threats to its security and to bring those responsible October 7th to justice. And the United States will always ensure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself. If Hamas fails to fulfill its commitments under the deal, Israel can resume military operations. But Egypt and Qatar have assured me, and they are continuing to work to ensure that Hamas doesn't do that. The United States will help ensure that Israel lives up to their obligations as well. That's what this deal says. That's what it says. And we'll do our part. This is truly a decisive moment. Israel has made their proposal. Hamas says it wants a ceasefire. This deal is an opportunity to prove whether they really mean it. Hamas needs to take the deal. For months, people all over the world have called for a ceasefire. Now it's time to raise your voices and demand that Hamas come to the table, agrees to this deal, and end this war that they began. Of course, there'll be differences on the specific details that need to be worked out. That's natural. If Hamas comes to negotiate, ready to deal, then Israel negotiations must be given a mandate, the necessary flexibility to close that deal. The past 8 months have marked heartbreaking pain. Pain of those whose loved ones are slaughtered by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. Hostages and their families waiting in anguish. Ordinary Israelis whose lives were forever marked by the shattering event of Hamas's sexual violence and ruthless brutality. And the Palestinian people have endured sheer hell in this war. Too many innocent people have been killed, including thousands of children. Far too many have been badly wounded. We all saw the terrible images from the deadly fire in Rafah earlier this week, following an Israeli strike against targeting Hamas. And even as we work to surge assistance to Gaza, with 1,800 trucks delivering supplies these last 5 days, 1,800, the humanitarian crisis still remains. I know this is a subject on which people in this country feel deep, passionate convictions, and so do I. This has been one of the hardest, most complicated problems in the world. There's nothing easy about this, nothing easy about it. Through it all, though, the United States has worked relentlessly to support Israeli security, to get humanitarian supplies into Gaza, to get a ceasefire and a hostage deal to bring this war to an end. Yesterday, with this new initiative, we've taken an important step in that direction. I want to level with you today as to where we are and what might be possible. But I need your help. Everyone who wants peace now must raise their voices and let the leaders know they should take this deal, work to make it real, make it lasting, and forge a better future out of the tragic terror attack and war. It's time to begin this new stage. For the hostages to come home, for Israel to be secure, for the suffering to stop. It's time for this war to end, for the day after to begin. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, can you tell us
President Biden there at the White House in the state dining room. Let's listen in.
Do you think the conviction will have an impact on the campaign? We'd love to hear your thoughts, sir.
Should he be on the ballot, sir?
Tempted, but not answering questions, obviously, about the news of the day here in this country. President Biden making news on two fronts here this Friday afternoon on both the felony conviction, criminal conviction of Donald Trump in the last 24 hours on 34 felony counts. He made news there, and we're going to get to that in a moment, calling it his comments today, Donald Trump's comments that it was rigged, that this trial was rigged. He said other things as well today. President Biden saying it is reckless, talking about the 12 jurors who did their job, that Donald Trump has every right to appeal, as anyone else would, in that moving forward. He also made news on a global scale here involving the war, the Israeli war with Hamas, saying it's time for the war to end. This is a decisive moment, laying out 3 phases that have been presented to Hamas. First of all, the major first phase is this 6-week ceasefire during which hostages, many of them would be released, including the American hostages that remain inside Gaza. Then there would be a second phase, a third phase, where all of the hostages would be released, Palestinian prisoners, and many of them would be released as well. He went on to describe how the U.S. would play a significant role in then helping to rebuild Gaza, rebuild schools and homes for the people, the Palestinian civilians who have suffered so much during this war as well. Let's bring in Mary Bruce. First off, the Israel-Hamas war, Mary. Why today? Why now? We know Israel presented this somewhat new proposal in recent days. It's clear that the White House, that President Biden has decided that this is the moment to put significant pressure on Hamas, saying that the world has called for a ceasefire, so now step up to the table and accept it.
Truly fascinating and pretty remarkable, David, considering the fact that these negotiations have been going on for weeks. But this is the first time that we have ever heard the president or the administration come out and detail what is on the table. The president just busted these negotiations wide open in an effort to up the pressure on Hamas. Of course, it also comes as the president himself has been under increasing pressure to do more to bring an end to this war. What you heard the president just lay out in very detailed, specific terms was a plan for a temporary ceasefire that he made clear would apply to all of Gaza. That includes presumably Rafah, which we know has been a sticking point, for the release of hostages in phases, beginning, as you mentioned, with women, elderly, wounded. Also, some of the deceased would be released. Aid would be allowed to rush in. Then critically, the president noting that that ceasefire after those 6 weeks would stay in place while they negotiate the second phase, which would include the release of the additional hostages. This is all an effort, this temporary ceasefire deal, of course, to lead to something more sustainable. Ultimately, he hopes, the end of this war. And the president is really trying to turn the tables on Hamas, saying, look, you said you wanted to end this. Now is a chance to show that you are serious. The president also nodding, of course, to the political pressure and mounting anger and frustration that we have seen play out in this country. The president saying, he understands it. He shares their frustration that what everyone is seeing, what the world is witnessing in Gaza is deeply painful. And the president seemed to urge everyone to also help up the pressure on Hamas to accept this deal. David, the president, as he said, noted that it is time for this war to end and the day after to begin. It is also notable, of course, that this comes as Israel has suggested that this war could go well into next year. This president wants to end this or have a pathway to end this by Election Day, certainly.
Mary, stick with us here. I'll be back to you in just a second on the other part of news that he made here. But let's get to Britt Clennett in Israel for a reality check on all of this. Britt, any indication from Hamas leadership that they would entertain the deal that's been on the table here for a couple of days?
Yeah, Biden's remarks don't necessarily reflect the pessimism on the ground, David. There is no indication that Hamas will accept a deal. Hamas has said it wants Israel to end its offensive in Gaza before any deal is struck. And Hamas leader today is saying that it won't accept any deal without a full ceasefire and Israeli forces withdrawing from Gaza. So they've been very clear. They said that's in light of the aggression, siege and starvation and genocide of our people. Now, Israel has said they would be a little bit more flexible with the number of live hostages released, but Hamas replied that it won't be releasing anyone under live fire. Now, what we're seeing again and again is both sides very much blaming each other for a lack of progress, and you could sense Biden's frustration in his tone there. And I spoke to an Israeli government official, David, just a few minutes earlier, who said that the military pressure, the success that they're seeing in Gaza, both in the north and in the south, is the main factor that works in ramping up these negotiations. So he didn't sound particularly optimistic that a deal would be struck any day soon. But certainly for the hostage families, it's an agonizing wait, David.
No question about that. Britt Clennett, we appreciate reporting. And as Britt so well spelled out here, you've got one side, Hamas, saying no ceasefire unless the military halts, the Israeli military. Of course, they're deep inside Rafah as we're on the air right now with their military operation. On the other hand, Israel says they won't entertain stopping in Rafah until Hamas agrees to the ceasefire. So you can see where this continues to be stalled. Let's get back to Mary Bruce. Mary, on the other story that the president did address, we were not sure if he would. This is the felony conviction of Donald Trump in the last 24 hours. 34 felony counts, unanimous. This jury of 12 in New York, and President Biden, it wasn't even just a passing reference. This is how he began his speech today.
Yeah, and notable, of course, the tone that he took in this. Of course, initially praising the legal system, noting that these were jurors just like any other Americans, that this is how the American legal system works. That, of course, is in response to all of Donald Trump's efforts to argue that this was all somehow, a political hit job against him, that the American legal system is somehow rigged. And the president then saying that it is reckless, dangerous, and irresponsible to say that this is rigged just because you don't like the outcome. What is also notable is that the president, didn't get into the political of this, right? He didn't take any political jabs at Trump over this. In fact, at the end there, when he was asked some follow-up questions, the president, as you noted, sort of stopped, looked like he wanted to play and engage, but he didn't. And that is very intentional. The president here is trying to stay above the fray and also, show that he is doing the job. It is interesting that he decided to respond in this way, coming out as he is giving these remarks about the Middle East, as Trump is out there, undermining the American legal system, airing his grievances about this trial, and now, putting retribution really at the center of his campaign. The president is coming out trying to show that he is being president, that he is trying to negotiate peace in the Middle East. That is a contrast that this campaign, that this White House very much wants to lean into and highlight, David.
All right, Mary Bruce on both fronts today. Mary, thank you. I'll see you for World News Tonight. In the meantime, let's bring in Rachel Scott here with me at the desk. Just a few seconds left here, Rachel. You heard Mary allude to this. Donald Trump speaking to the cameras right after the verdict yesterday. We carried that. And then today, addressing the cameras yet again. You heard Mary talk about this approach, at least so far, from the Biden campaign to show what they're trying to do is a stark difference between both sides. Donald Trump today continued to call the trial rigged, but went even further with some of the things he said about this country. And there's been reaction already.
Yeah, not a forward-looking speech less than 5 months out from Election Day. He called the judge a devil, said that we were living in a fascist state. This is a former president who blasted the legal system while also campaigning on law and order. What is clear, as Mary just noted here,